Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about risk and iterative development. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, hi Frederick, from your perspective, what type of risks can you minimize by using an iterative and incremental software development process? I'm assuming that you're talking about MVP or like small commits or like minimizing risk through development. Let's see if I can answer this. So usually what I say to people is that when you write software, every change that you make has the potential to break something in the code. It's a given. As soon as you change something about the system, even if it's a small thing, there's always a certain risk that you will get something wrong. And the goal of any well-working software process or software delivery process is to minimize the amount of time something breaks and maximize the velocity of the team, like how fast do you ship things. So speed versus quality, that's the age-old problem, right? Now, when you have a development process where you, as I like to say, you batch things. Now what a batch basically is, or like batching things, is that you can batch many things. You can like make batch commits where you have someone who works on one or several stories in the same pull request, and they commit like 100 file changes, and that's a problem. That's a big problem because usually when you do that, the code review is going to be very bad, because you're basically asking your coworker to review 100 files that you might have worked on for over several weeks. So from a quality perspective, that's not good. Then you of course have the so like the code review is probably not going to be so pleasant, so that's one part. The other part is to merge all that stuff, because the longer you spend on working on a story, the more likely you are to get merge conflicts. And I've seen guys who do this, especially for those touch all the places type of merges, where you have a story where you're going to change something fundamental about many areas of the code base. And when they try to do that in one go, it's always practically ends the same way. They work for a week or two on something, and then they spend another few days to just fix all the merge conflicts from all the other people's, because they keep on working, right? Merging things and so forth, and you have tons and tons of merge conflicts. And the only reason they have these conflicts is because they're touching so much code at the same time. So that's the one part, like that's when you can batch things. But then you also have the other stuff, which is like batch testing. Okay, so you have tons and tons of features now where you have like people who just merge into like a test environment or a QA environment or something like that. And now the testing also is harder, because basically you have more area to cover. And the more area you have to cover, the more likely you are to miss things. And then finally you have the release, which also is subject to batch, because if you're batching in the release, a lot of stuff can go wrong. And when something breaks in production, if you release like 10 stories at the same time, it's going to be really tricky for you to figure out which part broke, because there's so much that could have been broken. And now comes the next fun part. Okay, how are you going to fix it? Well, are you going to do a rollback? Well, if you're going to do a rollback, it's also going to be tricky, because now you have so much code and maybe just one part of it broke, but you actually have to roll back most likely, or potentially you could have to roll back all the features. There might be one thing that is broken, but it's bundled together with all this other stuff, so now you can't. It actually follows the principle that I like to follow in code. It's the reason why I tell people to not go overly into object-oriented programming when it comes to like classes and stuff like that, because if you have 3 functions in a class and you only need one function, that doesn't matter, because if it's part of that class, you have to get all the functions. The other 2 needs to be involved as well, and the whole object needs to be created in order to get to that function. But if you had separated these functions into like pure functions or something like that, then you could just get at the function that you want without all that extra overhead that comes with having the class around. And the same is true in software development. The more stuff that you include in the work that you do, the more likely you are to have to carry that stuff with you all the way into production. And that is always a problem. So when it comes to incremental development, You can do it in multiple levels. You can do it MVP style with a feature where you, as I like to say, ship the smallest thing that you can ship that is value building. And as I like to tell people again, MVP does not mean bad software. MVP means the minimum thing that is useful. And that basically means that for me, it starts with, okay, you're going to create some type of user experience, right? Okay, let's start by shipping the UI. Let's create like a stub UI with a little bit of JavaScript or whatever you're using, right, to create the UI. And then people can click around, see how it looks, things like that. You don't even have to build a backend. And then when that's shipped, or like when you've shown that this is how it's going to look, people are going to have thoughts, opinions, they might change stuff, and you can now iterate on that thing until it's sort of the thing that they want. Then you can wire up the backend and do the same thing. That way you can separate the backend, like the backend work with the front-end work, and minimize the amount of work that you have to do up front in order to get to the state you want to be, which is where your stakeholders are happy with the system, right? So that's the iterative approach at the feature level. And then you ship something to the users use it, and they might go, oh yes, this is really nice, but we're missing A, B, and C. And you go, okay, cool. Write down A, B, and C, and say, all right, we're going to do A now. Ship A. Do you like it? Yeah, but you know, I'm like, that's the beautiful part about shipping the minimum thing all the time, because they're going to find out more stuff every time you show them something. And if they don't find something out, then you just go over to B and then you do C. But it's better for you to do that than shipping A, B, and C at the same time, because if you ship a lot of stuff, the only thing that is actually useful, in my opinion, when it comes to shipping a lot of stuff is the sensation of accomplishment for the people, or like the sensation of completeness, because we humans unfortunately are very subjected to, we are easily influenced by awe, or things when something feels substantial. If you ship something small, that's not going to give people a wow factor. But if you ship the complete vision where everything is perfect and in harmony and so forth, that's when you get that like the emotional satisfaction, and that emotional satisfaction and the commitment to that emotional satisfaction is the worst culprit when it comes to legacy systems, overpromising, sharp deadlines, etc., because that the addiction to that sensation creates more problems than it creates value. But then shipping at a code level really comes down to trying to commit the minimum amount of thing that is necessary, get that out into production, and check that it, get it into the branch as quickly as possible. And that's actually something that's very useful for you to master, because as I said, in some cases you're going to do stuff that is like touching so much code that if you try to commit and do all the work in one batch, you're actually more likely to cause problems. So it's better for you to slice out like a piece of code, even if it's not the whole story, right? Maybe you're only defining some classes, or maybe you're only changing a few whatever's, right? And then merge that, like if you work in a trunk-based fashion or something like that. An example is like my coworker today. He is working on a standardization of a component, so he split it out into multiple steps, where he will create the component first, get a sign-off from the team on the thing that he's building, then merge that in, and then, because we have a lot of non-standard components, he's going to replace them. So now he creates one story for replacing each of the instances of the other components with the standard. So one big story goes in and becomes one initial story to get the component, and then 3 or 4 smaller stories to just replace each instance. Because doing that, although it creates a little bit more process overhead because we're going to have to merge and ship and so forth, it's actually safer for us to do that, because if something goes wrong, it's easier for us to roll back, it's easier for us to deal with the problem because it's so narrow in terms of scope. So what I want you to take away from this is that iterative software development is a very good thing, and minimizing risk is the big benefit of doing it in an iterative fashion. The less code that you are committing and shipping, and the less feature like scope and so forth you're shipping, the easier it is for you to find problems, make sure that you're not doing more work than you need, etc., etc. it's overall a good thing. The main problem is that this is a lot of hassle if you have a really slow release process or something like that, which is one of the big arguments for working, as I like to say, right to left, where you always start with the thing doing the work that is closest to getting things out into production, and then work backwards towards like, if you imagine a Kanban board, you go backwards through testing, code review, working on your own work, or picking up something new. The reason why that is very effective is because, as I said, it makes sure that you're always shipping things as soon as they are done, because the more frequent you can release things and the smaller you can make those releases, the better for you, and the more stable it most likely is for you to ship those sorts of things. Because the more stuff you have, the less likely you are to find bugs in your testing, or do proper code reviews, or write unit tests, like all of this stuff. Because there is, as I like to say, there's a mental barrier for how much scope a human brain can keep track of at any given time. So if you write something where you touch like the entire code base at the same time, odds are that you're gonna have it's going to be a big risk for you. It's much better for you to just slice that out into multiple smaller stories, especially if you're going to have like multiple teams reviewing. I've been in situations where I've touched like a monorepo for like three or four different teams, and they all have to approve my pull requests. And as you can imagine, if I have one big pull request that they all have to review, it's gonna take a million years for them all to get back to me. So instead, I chunked out the stories into smaller, like the work into smaller stories that was isolated to their parts of the code. That way, I could merge the 2 or 3 teams while waiting for the 4th one to get back from vacation and things like that. So small and iterative work is usually a very good investment for you. Have a great day.